Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, which was acquired by Uniguest, a company committed to developing engagement technologies to help communities connect and improve quality of life for older adults. Today, I'm joined by my friend Chris Heinz, the president and managing director with Westport One, a recruitment firm that specializes in senior living leadership, information technology, and financial services and banking, with his direct focus being senior living leadership.
Mhm.
Chris is actually the first guest I've had on for the second time. The first time he came on, we talked about his fundraiser where he was running for 24 hours straight, which is just mind boggling as I say that out loud. But Chris has just been an awesome person in this industry, a good friend of mine, and just love that he's all that he's doing out there. So thanks for coming on today, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much, Matt. I am honored to be your first two-timer.
Yeah. Hey, we'll have to get you a trophy or something for
All
that for sure.
right.
So Chris, I probably have asked you this in the last episode, but for someone that might be listening this first time, can you just share your background and how you got into the recruitment space, especially for senior living?
Sure, absolutely. My background has been in advertising and sales for my entire career. A little known secret is nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be a recruiter one day. Every recruiter I know came in the industry through some other resource. And mine came from wanting to find a way to utilize my sales skills to actually have an impact on what I was selling. Because there are so many things you could sell that you might impact somebody's life for 3 seconds a day, a copy or a machine or something like that. But with recruitment, we had the ability, and I saw it from the very beginning, and I still see it today, almost 27 years later, that we have the ability to help grow companies and to directly impact people's lives. And from a selling standpoint, that's pretty darn cool. Once we transitioned into the senior living space and added that as one of our focus points, it added even a greater element of not only are we helping companies, not only are we directly impacting the lives of the professionals that we place, but by doing both of those things, now we're helping the residents within the communities to live their best lives. So it really is a fulfilling practice of what we do. And I got into it because I wanted to help both companies and people, and the byproduct of those was to help myself. But now I have that fourth win, really, of helping the residents as well.
I love that. It's just about finding purpose in whatever you're doing. And I can definitely feel that coming from you. And, considering you've been in recruitment, I know that's where we're going to take this conversation today.
Yeah.
So one of the things, because I definitely know that people are struggling to recruit great talent, right? And so I'm curious, like, how do you define great talent in today's workforce, especially for those critical leadership roles?
Sure. So let me first start with what it's probably not. It's not the great talent definition of the early 21st century, of that theory that don't look at anybody unless they've been with the company for 5 or 7 or 10 years. I wish that were the case, but the reality is the days of looking at a resume that have only 3 jobs within their last 15 years of experience, maybe 20 years of experience, and discount everybody else, unfortunately, those days are gone. So we have to get beyond just the years of experience and look at what impact they had within the roles that they held. Now, the reality is with a couple of the roles within senior living leadership at the community level, the executive director, the director of sales, as well as the regional operations and sales levels, great talent's pretty easy to define because you could see the numbers. Kept NOI low, increased occupancy. Those are numbers that can jump out of a page, jump off of a page. But for other roles, director well, pick the title, the generic DON or the health and wellness director, the director of resident care. There's our 14 different titles or iterations of the nursing leadership, and even moving into the regional levels. The things that jump out of the page there aren't as prevalent as a number. It's about care, it's about compassion, it's about, yes, dollars and cents are involved with their staff. So while there's two variations there, one thing still holds true. Great talent comes through the conversation that you have with them. The resume is only a starting point to get to a conversation with a candidate. And it doesn't matter whether that resume comes from a company's own resources, their own ads that they have online, whether they do any outreach via LinkedIn, whether it comes through a recruiting firm like myself. The resume is only a starting point to the conversation. So great talent comes from that conversation to understand what's their makeup, what makes them passionate about what they do.
I love that. Wow. And I'm like moved from you like saying that. But yeah, it makes so much sense, right? You can learn so much in that conversation, and the
Yeah,
resume is just kind of the bridge to get there.
that's right.
Um, and I'm curious with now, because it definitely seems like the market has shifted in some degree. Like, how would you say, or what would you say are some of the most effective strategies you've seen or used to attract some of that top talent in those critical roles?
It's interesting because obviously the two letters that everyone has heard 14 times over in the last 12 to 14 months is AI, right? AI is everywhere, whether you think it's in your industry or not, it is. But AI is not the end all be all to recruitment strategies right now. The reason being is there are so many tools that are out there, and I've yet to see one that is fully developed and fully flushed through where there is a market leader. There is not an Indeed or there is not a LinkedIn in the AI space from a technology sector. So let's bring it back to strategies, and we'll go a little bit old school, a little bit new school. The old school strategy of the job posting. Every company does it. Every company is going to keep doing it. And from a cost sense, it makes practical sense as long as you're managing the budget without having to specify who it is. Everybody knows that most of the job postings are cost per click. And without a defined budget attached to that, that could really spiral out of control. So while companies are going to use them, it's important to understand what are you getting from the ad. And I don't want to call it a pet peeve, but I'll call it pretty darn close. A job posting with the duties, responsibilities, the amount that they need to lift, how well they can walk and chew gum at the same time, those are not a selling tool. That is an internal write-up that is critical. You have to have a job description. Every company has them. But that job description should not be the ad utilized to attract talent. Because a job description attracts people, for the most part, who are looking for a job. They aren't looking for the next step in their career. So if anything could come from this conversation, Matt, if that one thing is that a company goes back and looks at their postings and they try to work to find a better way to sell the story of their company, to sell the opportunity. And then the great thing is, with almost every job board that is out there, you can set up auto triggers that if a candidate does apply and you mark them with, let's say, a thumbs up, that it'll automatically send them the job description to review. So that's one strategy that's, I'm going to call it old school because postings have gone back since the late 90s. Heck, when I was in college, I had two students on my floor. I was a resident advisor, and I had two students on my floor that were beta testing the original Monster.com. And back then, Monster.com was only for tech folks. It was just for IT. So we're going back to the dark ages of the 20th century that I've seen job boards around. So that is more of an old school technology. Another old school technology for finding the right talent is that good old fashioned conversation. We have conversations with everybody in our industry. And because my firm has multiple industries that I have recruiters in, while my focus is senior living leadership, like you mentioned, I have recruiters in other sectors. I've yet to see another sector within recruitment that is as sharing of information and insight as the senior living industry. A community that is practically kitty corner, 500 yards away, can share and will share information with the executive director or the director of sales that's practically across the street. That's practically unheard of in any other industry. So leaders are having conversations all the time. So they need to have that recruitment hat on as one of those little elements of that of the hat they wear for all the things they have to do. But they have to always be thinking of that one conversation that could be their next executive director, their next regional director. I'll flash forward to a new school technique, and that is utilizing LinkedIn from a communication tool. I don't want to call it a branding tool because it's really not about that, but it's a communication tool about your company's culture. There are some companies, and you and I have seen them because you and I are on LinkedIn a little bit, right?
Just a little bit.
Myself, maybe a little more than you because that's just the nature of our business. But there are some organizations in our senior living space that are incredible at sharing the stories of the company culture and the culture of the residents. Whether it be LinkedIn, whether it be TikTok, whether it be Instagram, some are incredible at that. Unfortunately, the vast majority is not there. So the more that a story could be shared about that culture, it is a branding tool. Go back to that. It is a branding tool to show a future employee what that company and that community is all about. So that little old school, little new school for you.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's just so important too, as you're thinking about it. It was funny to hear you say monster.com. I can't remember the last time I heard that. I almost had to like rack my brain to remember what that was. But yeah, and it's so true. And it just reminds me, I have a friend, his name's Dean, and he likes to
Yeah.
do like those TikToks and really just
Yep.
like kind of help showcase the culture that's being built within these communities. And like that's what I find is really resonating for people too, especially for some of those roles that might be more of the care level. Cause like these are the platforms that they're on and this is what they're
That's right.
seeing and they're being told or they've been told one story and this is an opportunity to tell the story in a different way and for them to really embrace that.
Yeah,
Uh,
Dean does a great job. Nate does a great job with Dash Media, but it could come down to the individual leaders within the communities
right.
themselves. I mean, Aspenwood has a engagement director. I can't think of her name at the top of my
I
head,
know you're talking
but
about.
she
Yep.
is amazing at sharing the day in the life of an engagement director. But it shares the real story and it gets to the heartbeat of the organization.
I love that. Yeah, it's so important to really capture those stories and help them to showcase. And like, yeah, really any individual can do that,
That's
right? And
right.
like just owning it and embracing it is doing that. And I know coming into this call, one of the feelings that I was having, which I think you kind of confirmed, and I won't give it away, but it's just this idea of the regional role within senior living. And I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, like what are you seeing happen to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been obviously in the recruitment space forever. I mean, my firm's been around for 50 years. Fortunately, I've not been with it for 50. I'm just too young for that, right?
Yeah, yeah. You would have
But
started with like
we
-8. Yeah.
exactly. I started when I was only 4.
Yeah.
um, but we being that we've been in senior living leadership for a long time, I've seen some of the transitions and the ebbs and flows of that regional role. What I've seen over the last 12 to 18 months, which we would have thought we would have seen more in the pure 3 years of the pandemic, but I've seen this more so in the last 12 to 18 months, is that regional role where an organization might have 4 or 6 regional directors of operations, and maybe 3 or 4 regional directors of sales, and maybe 2 or 3 regional directors of care. Rather than 6 RDOs, now they got 3 or 4. So that I've seen those roles compacted down, which is understandable from a cost standpoint. I mean, at the end of the day, organizations have to make enough money for the entire organization to thrive, but it may be challenging from a longevity standpoint of those that stay in those roles. Because now that RDO or that RDS, rather than having 8 or 10 communities, now they have 12 or 15. And they're already at the peak of their head being just above the top of the water at 8 or 10. And now they've added another 40%. So it can be really challenging for an organization to keep those RDOs, RDSs, regional directors of care long term if they have another opportunity that comes that promises a smaller batch of communities to be responsible for. The other element of that is the travel becomes more increased. And that again can wear on the mind, the body, and the soul when it comes to having some semblance of I don't want to call it a work-life balance because I don't believe in that. It's just called life. but a true balance of being able to be impactful on the job and being impactful with the family.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. I've got some friends that are in that RDO position, and I thought I traveled a lot, but they're on the road every week,
Yeah.
and just feeling for that. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, is it primarily just the cost savings? I mean, is that what's really driving that, and they just expect that more people can do more with that within that role, or what do you think is kind of driving that?
I mean, cost is part of it. Organizations have done a really good job over the last several years of trying to create career paths for that executive director that wants to move up, for the director of sales that wants to move up. That typical intermediate stage is the ops specialist or the sales specialist. And everyone who goes into those roles, except for those that have just found that is their passion. And we've talked to some of those that their passion is to parachute into community, help fix the problems, whether it's operationally, whether it is occupancy, and then move on to the next one. They just love that. But for the vast majority, that ops specialist, that's the stepping stone to the regional level or to even to the VP level, depending upon the size of the company. So companies have set a good career path to allow for advancement and promotion. But the challenge is that sometimes organizations have promoted somebody because there was a fear of losing them. Okay, I understand. I understand. You want to move on, but you don't need to move on from somebody else. We'll carve out these 6 communities for you, these 4 communities for you. And there's a little bit of abundance of operational and sales leadership at that regional level. Small percentage of it came down to that. The vast majority, unfortunately, came down to a cost savings.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to see how this workforce has kind of evolved, and I think too, right, that career path. There might only be one of those one VP levels, right?
Uh-huh.
And then if 6 people are all vying for that job, it just makes it that much more difficult too.
Yeah,
And
because then now they have to make a decision that the individual is in the role. Do I wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years before statistically somebody's going to move on so I can move up? Or do I take that step to another company? And that's
yeah,
a real challenge because people stay in their companies mostly because they love the organization, they love the people that they're working with. But if it's not satisfying their career aspirations, they have to make that tough decision.
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And you kind of mentioned challenges, and I'm curious, just from like a broader scale, like what are some of the challenges that companies are facing today to recruit great talent?
Yeah, some of the greatest challenges that they're coming across beyond what we've already spoken about is just actual talent being found. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. But the challenge is sometimes it is literally just quantity. I've spoken with several, whether it be the RDO or the vice president of operations or even the COO, and just in the last month, where they've put ads out there. And a perfect example, conversation a week and a half ago. Put an ad out for an executive director. 400 applicants to the role. Yay, right? Guaranteed you got somebody, right? No. The 4 people that were qualified, because the vast majority that apply are set up on Autobots. So they're looking for a job, they set their parameters, and they set it up for auto apply. So they found 4 of the batch that were worth talking to. All 4 had interviews scheduled. All 4 either ghosted them or no-showed.
Wow.
So it's not just quantity from a quantity number of talent applying. It's those that are actually qualified, interested, and motivated to make a move. And we see that at every leadership level, whether it be the community level, whether it be the regional level, whether it be at the C level. There is talent that's out there, but it doesn't mean that they're looking at the ads.
Mm,
It doesn't mean, shocker of all shockers, that they aren't on LinkedIn and they aren't seeing their messages that pop in from, whether it be from a recruiter, from an external recruiter like us, or from an internal recruiter, or from heck the CEO themselves. If they don't see those emails, they're never going to apply. So it is a real challenge of finding the right talent for the roles. I'm gonna jump back to that tenure a little bit. There are leaders in our industry that are still fixated on tenure is everything without understanding. And I any conversation I have with a leader, I try to make sure to discuss the gap. And the gap is that the 3 years of the pandemic, that when we look at tenure of individuals, particularly leaders, particularly in the ED and nurse leadership side, that you almost have to wash your mind of any movement that happened during those 3 years. Because burnout was not just a fictitious word, it was real. People were overworked because they had to, and they stayed at the job because they wanted to. But burnout happened. People also, if they lost their roles, they had to find something to pay the bills. So there are many stopgap roles in that period. So if we can wash out those 3 years and remove some of the job movement involved there, all of a sudden tenure looks a little bit better. But the challenge is there are still leaders in our industry that look at resumes and go, oh, no, they've been with 5 jobs in the last 3 years. But 3 of those years were, or 2 of those years were during the pandemic time. And they fail to look at whether it is an interim role or a permanent role. So a shift needs to happen of get into a conversation if they have the skills. Find out through a conversation. Are they in it just for the money? Are they in it just for the flexibility? Are they in it just for the benefits? Or are they in it for the right reasons, but they had the wrong team? Did they have the wrong leaders that were helping them? Was there no support? Was there no structure? Were unethical things being done? We always coach our candidates that we're working with to never talk bad about a company. But the one understanding is I left because of ethical conflicts. That's not saying anything bad without saying it specifically, but it is still saying my ethics are more important than the almighty bottom line or doing things for the sake of having to do them because somebody told me if it was completely ethically wrong. So those are just a couple of the challenges that we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah. Wow. That's so much wisdom there, Chris. I mean, just even kind of thinking through that and some of the things that you were hitting on there. Um, Amazing how 400 people apply, 1% are actually qualified, and then
Yeah.
the whole ghosting scenario just
Yep.
blows my mind. And I'm wondering on like your recruitment process, because I think, at times, right, senior living, you kind of continue to see people once they
Yeah.
kind of get in this industry, they stick in it, they stay in it, they're not really
Yep.
leaving or just kind of jumping from groups to groups. But I'm wondering in like your recruitment strategy, like how often you're looking outside of the industry for some of these leadership positions, and if you've learned anything along the way to recruit people outside of the industry to kind of come in, use those leadership skills, learn the skills of senior living, and really just try and flourish there.
Yeah, when you're asking that question, the visual that's popping into my head is standing out, thinking of like a nurse leader, of standing outside of a hospital with those old sandwich boards with an advertisement on the front and the back. Please come work for us. I mean, it's almost to the point of having to get really creative to find the right people. And looking outside the industry works really well in some roles. Okay, we all know that the licensures at the executive director or administrator side, for the most part, almost every state has some form of licensure requirement. So we get that. We know that on the nursing side, whether it needs to be an RN, an LPN, an LVN, you can't just wake up today and tomorrow decide, I want to be a nurse leader. It doesn't work that way. There's schooling and there's certifications that have to happen. But there are ways to look outside of the industry, both in a short-term, quick fix standpoint, as well as more of the long game. So let's talk about both of those. In the quick fix standpoint, sales is the most readily accessible transitionary shift. We see it that you can bring in a great salesperson if they have the right care and compassion. They are not just in it for the dollar, and they are not in a one-call close environment. But you can bring people in from high level or high ticket sales items, consultative sales approaches, people that maybe still be dealing with the senior population just in a different capacity, or luxury items. I mean, think of on the coasts, the yacht sales or the luxury condo sales. There are people that are in sectors that can transition very well into senior living if the leaders within the organizations are willing to look at them. So when we have our intake call with a company on an opening, as an example, we're going to ask them what's the background you're looking for, the duh factor. Of course, we're going to ask that. But then we ask them, how much can we push the limits here? How willing are you to look outside of the industry for great talent? So that's just a short-term thing. On the nurse leadership side, organizations have looked at the hospital nurses. But one thing that organizations need to get better at is figuring ways, and maybe it's through a partnered consultant, whether it's through some type of shared on-call system. But we know this industry is a 24/7 industry, particularly at the care level. And the challenge that we've seen, not just with those that we've recruited, but also with the stories we've heard from leaders within the industry, that when a nurse leader is at a hospital setting, as an example, when their shift is done, they're done. They say they say bye to Bob, they say bye to Susan, and they walk out the door. And then they come in the next day. Well, our industry is not set up that way because the residents are there 24/7. So the challenge of transitioning a nurse leader from a hospital setting to a senior living setting is more challenging because of that 24/7 environment. So organizations need to figure the best way, or I should say, at least a better way to manage that, where a nurse leader will have responsibility ultimately 24/7, but not that it is an all-consuming burnout possibility driven situation. On the executive director side, many executive directors come from typically two avenues. Forget the school side, because there are some incredible schools. I mean, you are helping a couple universities that I know of with their senior living degrees, which is amazing. So there are schools that have created career tracks for gerontology, for senior living, for senior housing, and for the leadership and administration side. So we'll skip that just for a moment, because that is very much a long-term game, right? That's not an overnight thing. You don't get your degree one day and all of a sudden now you're an executive director. So we'll set that aside for just a minute, and let's talk about the people within your communities. I love hearing the story of the CNA who's now the executive director, but there's not enough of them. There's not enough of the homegrown talent. There's not enough of the mentality of, let's create I'll call it an academy, but a true career path where we take a prospective individual that's working with us, that has the hard work, that shows the passion, that wants to make a career of this, to show them a way and actually give them a true bona fide path that we can help them every step of the way so that we build that next leader. I know of organizations who have done this, but unfortunately, some of them do it in a very short pattern. They do it from the business office director. Okay, you say you want to be an ED one day? Cool. We're going to put you through 6 week of programs. Now you're on our bench for a potential ED. 6 weeks, my friend, does not make an ED. So the training involved there just does not cut it completely. So create a way to find, whether it be the sales leadership, whether it be nurse leadership, whether it be the BOM, whether it be that CNA, where you could put together a 3 to 5 year path for them. So they get exposed to multiple areas of the company. They understand how to read a P&L statement, and how to understand what NOI really is. Because that's going to create a lifetime employee, and it's looking outside the industry, but it's looking right there in front of you. Sometimes we step over dollars to look for nickels, and we got the dollars right there in front of us. We just don't grab them.
Wow. Again, just so much wisdom in that. Yeah, I think at times we're sense smarts, but dollar stupid, and we need
Yeah.
to kind of flip that on its head. And then my last question here for you, Chris, and arguably my favorite, if you're just to give senior living providers just 3 guiding principles as we move through the rest of the year, what would you say?
I don't know if I could come up with 3 off the top of my head, but 2 are immediately in my head, and they're guiding principles for myself as well, and myself and my recruiting partner and my team. And I'm gonna take an old acronym from sales of ABC. You know what ABC is, right? Always be selling. Always be closing. Pick your word for it. So I'm gonna flip that to ABR. Always be recruiting. Every conversation we have at conferences, in daily interactions, in walkthroughs, in tours, always be recruiting and thinking of who's the next person that I might be able to reach out to. That'd be one guiding principle. And the second one, and I really think this can be a significant change artist for many organizations, is to streamline or at least clean up their interviewing process. Because an interviewing process is just that. It gets candidates through a process. But the difference is, does it get you a hire? So companies that have processes that they've used for years because it's what they've done does not mean it's the best process for today. Look and evaluate what you are doing in your interviewing process to determine how many people are you losing along the way that you wanted. And if you're losing nobody, then stick with it. But odds are, every organization for every role that they've had in the last 6 months has lost somebody that they wanted because their process was too long. There was limited to no feedback to keep the candidates excited, and they lost out on talent. So how can interviews be combined together? How can it be streamlined? How can there be true urgency so that if you do find the one that you want for the particular role, you could actually hire them, not just interview them? So those are the two best guiding principles I could tell you that I would think would be great for this year.
I love it. So much wisdom. Thank you, Chris. You wear that second guest or first guest to come on twice
That's
badge
right.
of honor. Yeah, you crushed it. So thank you so much. I appreciate all that you do for this industry, and excited to see how you continue to move it forward. So thank you.
Well, hey, Matt, I want to throw it right back at you. What you've done with this podcast has been truly incredible. You brought on people that I would never have thought of listening to, but some of the wisdom that they've had has really been inspiring. So thank you for everything that you do as well.
I appreciate that. Hey, joint effort. It's a team effort all around. So thank you, Chris.
That's right. Hey, anytime, I'm all ears.
Ooh.
If you'd like to know when we post the next episode, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you're interested in how Eversound can help improve the quality of life in your community, find out more at eversoundhq.com.